Sit right down and I'll show you where my dreams began.
I'm Michael Dugan, your culinary host, guiding you through the chef's journey. Join me at the chef's table, where you'll experience stories, secret sauces, signature dishes, and kitchen disasters. In this special episode, I want to extend huge gratitude to the inspiring Toastmaster and leader, Ray Miller, for welcoming me as his guest. Together, we delve deep into the evolution of Voice4Chefs, Toastmasters, and the culinary conversations that fuel the Voice4Chefs podcast.
Welcome to episode 15 of the District 7 podcast. I am happy to share our conversation with the host of the Voice4Chefs podcast, Michael Dugan. Michael is a Toastmaster in District 7, a member of the Podmasters Toastmasters, and has a podcast with, at the time of this conversation, 70 episodes. Get ready for an enlightening conversation about giving voice to passion, sharing doubts, fears, courage, and tenacity in the Voice4Chefs podcast. This is the District 7 podcast, presented by Podmasters Toastmasters. My name is Ray Miller, and please enjoy this conversation with Michael Dugan. Welcome to the District 7 podcast. Michael, how are you this morning?
I am fantastic.
Are you ready for my first question?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm interested to hear your answer. Michael, what is the best sandwich?
All right. So I have not shared this with you, but I just realized it. When I was first dating my wife, we had this place called Larry's Market. Larry's Market was a gourmet food shop and grocery store in Seattle, Washington. It's gone now, but back in the day when I was dating my wife, I bought crab. But I didn't just buy crab. I bought soft shell blue crab because I made her a soft shell blue crab sandwich. Now, if you don't know, soft shell blue crabs have the whole body, like the whole shell they shed, and you eat everything, including the eyes. And she saw it and she was grossed out, but she ate it and she asked me for a second one. That's always been my favorite, is soft shell blue crab. They call them poor boys, actually.
I've heard of them before. I really like the sound of that. I've said this in the last interview that I recorded too.
Okay.
I asked that question because it always leads to an interesting story, and I'm not writing a cookbook about the best sandwich, but I've had a lot of great stories from that one. When did you first join Toastmasters leading into that? When you joined Toastmasters, what was your reason for coming into it the first time?
Well, the very first time that I heard about it, I was at Washington State University in school, and I was taking a speech communication class. And people weren't very serious about the class. They wanted to party in college and everything. And I was very serious. This was my junior year or senior year. I wanted to get better at public speaking. And I always had a fear of standing up in front of people. Sounds familiar for a lot of us. And the teacher took me aside at the end of the semester and he said, "You have great speeches. Have you ever thought about Toastmasters?" And I was like, "I have no idea what that is." And he explained it to me. I waited a few years after I graduated from college. I went to a Toastmaster club north of me now, probably about 40 minutes north. I won't give you the name because I walked in, they ignored me. There was 20 people in the room. They ignored me. And in the middle, they asked me to introduce myself and tell a story about myself. And I felt so nervous. And at the end, they completely ignored me. So I never went back for 10 years. But then one day, I was working for Boeing in the corporate headquarters, and I saw an announcement that said, "Come to a potluck and learn about Toastmasters." It was on the 5th floor of the executive building. I was nervous. I had this vision that I was going to be judged by sales executives, vice presidents that were in the building. and I worked in technology there. And so I went, and I was greeted by so many amazing people. They gave me hugs and just made me feel incredible. The next week, I gave my icebreaker, and I just fell in love. And that was over 10 years ago. And I've been in Toastmasters ever since, 6 years in leadership, just had an amazing journey. I went like everybody else to get over my fear.
I feel like that is a relevant story for anybody who's been in Toastmasters for a long time. I think I've been in Toastmasters almost the same time as you have, because I joined in 2013.
Wow.
Because my other half said, you need somebody to talk to. Okay. That was her encouragement to me, but I had stage experience before. It wasn't a stage fright thing. It was a storytelling thing for me.
Wow.
I'm also one of the topics of conversation that we talked about in our pre-interview, and I wanted to circle back to, is talking about our common interest in podcasting and interviewing, because you've been running your own now successful podcast.
Yeah. Actually, it's been 2 seasons, and there should be 69 or 70 episodes total.
70.
Yeah, 70. Incredible journey. Just incredible.
What was your experience in your first 10 episodes? Did you pre-record them all, or were they haphazard? Did you book guests as you were catching them for that first few?
Oh my gosh. Thinking back, the very first couple, I do pre-recorded, and not because I'm nervous. I was nervous in the beginning. I had imposter syndrome like many people, but as I went along, I got over it. But I do it for the chefs to make it pre-recorded because their schedules are so tight. They're so stressed. So it's kind of like a coaching session when I do an interview, because I help them relax. That's why I do pre-recorded. And so in the very beginning, though, it was challenging because the first episode was called Stay Hungry, and it was with my wife. And I'll tell you, that was very challenging. That was very emotional because that was the first episode, but also I had a Yeti mic, which I did not like. And I used it, and literally she stood on a stool because she's shorter than me. And we went on both sides of the microphone having a conversation, because that's all I could afford at the time. One microphone. And editing 16-minute episode took me 6 hours because I was learning Audacity. I was learning how to edit, but also trying to edit somebody talking into a microphone from both sides is pretty challenging. But so back then, I launched with 3 episodes, and I had no idea how I was going to get the next chef. It was very risky in the beginning, but now they call me from all over the world. So I can't keep up. I've got lots of guests, but back then it was 3 episodes pre-recorded and a lot of learning, steep learning curve.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I said pre-recorded too, I was meaning more like lots of episodes recorded in the can, not live stream, but more like recording. Like I do pre-recorded. Well, I record, but at one point over the last year, I've had 4 episodes in the can that I've been working on an edit for. Yeah. But for like pre-recorded in the backlog, like how many episodes do you have in your editing backlog at this point?
Right now, I think I have 4. But see, back then, that's the other thing. I used to call restaurants in Seattle and beg the manager to talk to their chef. And it took a month to get that conversation to happen. Now I have 5 other people that I need to reach out to all over the world. And literally, I'm getting ready to start those conversations, do pre-interviews like we do, which is the best way to go.
Yeah.
But right now I have 3 or 4 that are in the hopper that I got to finish editing.
Yeah, I can see as things grow and as things gain momentum, you just want to keep up with the conversation and keep having this conversation. Tell me a little bit about your podcast. What is the one thing that you're wanting to drill down to when it comes to each podcast when you're talking to a chef?
My wife is a user experience and a senior user experience person and designer. And she's very creative. And she taught me early on about creating experiences. So for me, it's not about asking questions. It's about creating a whole journey. Every interview, I do a lot of research, and it's like a walkthrough of the chef's life. And one of my favorite episodes a very special one was with a French chef in Vancouver, Canada. And when we interviewed, he opened up and it was like he was semi-retired and he was looking back at his whole life. And I mean, I asked just a few questions and all of a sudden I was just following his whole career. Those are the kind of interviews that I try to create, are those chef experiences.
You remember what episode that was?
I don't remember. Yeah, it was, gosh, his last name was Couton. And I don't have it handy. I mean, I can post it in show notes or something like that. But it was really incredible because he cooked for royalty in Thailand. He actually worked in a restaurant where they got their first Michelin star and he was a kid. And the chef said, you can't tell anybody. And he's telling me this story, right? He's semi-retired and he just opened up with all this emotion and it was so natural and transparent. Frederick Couton is the name. Yeah, you can look it up. But oh my gosh, it was epic. And then I interviewed his son. And the reason that I did this was because they create lobster oil. And it's this concept of fancy restaurants would use it in Canada and they pour it on bread or they put it in soup. And it's something you can have for a long time. And they literally go from the West Coast to the East Coast to get the lobster to extract the oil. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was brilliant. And so it's a father and son thing, right? The father is the chef. The son is a marketing guy, right? And he's really good. So I interviewed both of them. But Frederick just hit my heart because, I mean, he's cooked for presidents, he's cooked for royalty, and he was so humble. And that experience was epic. And Canadian, by the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I know
about Vancouver. Leading into my next question,
mm-hmm.
As a former professional chef,
yeah,
people find it challenging to watch movies or TV shows with you where a chef or a cooking or a kitchen is an important part of the story.
You mean if I'm watching a movie with somebody else?
Yeah.
Around that? I get pretty passionate about it. You could ask my wife, but I don't have PTSD, which I probably had when I worked in the restaurant business. It was really tough. Like watching The Bear, people talk about that, The Bear. And if you don't know, it's a show about the restaurant business. I'm kind of fearful because friends of mine that are chefs said they kind of felt PTSD from it. And I don't know if I want to go back to that feeling, but I kind of do. I kind of want to connect back to it. But I love watching chef shows. Absolutely love it. The problem, though, is that they glamorize the stress and it's real stress. PTSD and mental health is a real thing in the restaurant business. People are abused. And that's part of what the podcast is about, is to expose that and to talk to people and help them share those experiences and help them kind of heal as well. So
one thought talking about PTSD and chef is one of the movies that had a huge impact on me in my cooking was the Jon Favreau movie Chef.
Oh, yeah.
And there was that scene in the early part of the movie after he'd extricated himself from his commercial kitchen and everything like that, when he lined up, when he basically went to a farmer's market and picked up a bunch of stuff and then went home and just made this incredible spread at home on his own table and sampling all the textures and everything like that. That changed my experience for how I look at restaurant food in general. So I look for opportunities for that kind of storytelling.
Yep.
And seeing that the stress has a root as well.
And it's funny because I gear questions to create storytelling. Every question has a purpose. And it's so important as a podcaster. If you're listening and you're thinking about podcasting, don't just ask random questions. Ask something that you think is going to bring some emotion or some powerful story from your guest. Receive $10 off your next purchase with Voices4Chefs 10.
You don't know what to make for dinner again? You want to explore new cuisines, but you don't have time? What if you have new inspirations and we provide you with the ingredients and recipes? We know you want to travel, learn new foods, explore the world, but life's responsibilities keep getting in your way. What if you can bring those experiences to your home neatly packed into a box? Ladyboo Collective is a subscription service that finds real people from around the world to create beautifully curated assortments of recipes, ingredients, and cultural content. Not only do we include cultural ingredients, but also a set of detailed recipe cards with instructions on how to use them. Each box also has a QR code that when scanned takes you to tons more global exploration to immerse yourself in. Everything from film to lifestyle, art to history, it all can be found here. Live your life to the fullest. Subscribe now and don't miss out on the next cultural adventure. Ladyboo Collective. Always exploring.
That's why I start my questions always off with the sandwich question, because
I love it. Yeah.
Everybody has a different story about their favorite sandwich, which is interesting. And then sometimes people will answer like explaining why a hot dog is a sandwich, which is an interesting answer in its own way too. But yeah, it is an interesting thing to dig into. Always there's a story involved in everything. Into Toastmasters stuff, and I'm imagining this because I've worked in kitchens before.
Cool.
I'm always interested in micro processes or practices. So like the sous chef who makes the prep cook who makes everything the right shape, the right texture, the right everything. And I think about that in a Toastmasters world too. Every single role, every single project has its own micro
checklist.
The thing that the texture that you want to get out of the kind of thing. Have you noticed any, from your perspective, rhymes or similarities between the kitchen practice of making things with the right shape and the right texture into the Toastmasters world by the chairperson or the table topics master or the counter even?
You could think of it this way. There's a famous French term called mise en place, and it's about being prepared. It's about having your stuff together, to be politically correct. You have your onions chopped, you have your celery chopped, you have your mushrooms chopped, you have everything lined up for the day. Your prep work is done. Your mise en place is ready to go. So when you hit the saute line as a chef or as a cook, you've got all your ingredients in front of you. You got your sauces ready. Because honestly, if you don't, then you're in a panic. Then you're in a catch up for the whole day. So it's kind of like giving a speech, right? You practice it, you get ready for it, you get criticism from it maybe. I record every speech before I give it, and I listen back to it, and then I evaluate it. But that's the kind of preparation, mise en place, that I do before I prepare. If I have a grammarian role, I might go out on the web and research being a grammarian, tips and tricks, and maybe have a checklist and those kind of things. So for me, it's all about mise en place. And that's something I learned in the restaurant business.
The one evaluation that changed things for me was always the counter evaluation 6 or 7 years ago. I remember, and the evaluation in the explanation at the end of the meeting, when he's giving the count of this many ums, this many ahs, this many so's, this many filler words. At the end of his evaluation, he said, I'm not counting these because they're not words that your words are not supposed to be using. I'm counting them because unconscious use of these words is the thing that I'm learning to practice and recognize. You can use filler words. They're totally fine as long as you're aware of them. Where is your brain automatically doing in between thoughts, though? That's where filler words become interesting.
And it's interesting too, and maybe you already have this as a question, but I definitely want to interject this. Filler words are a nightmare in podcasting. And I'll give you an example. I interviewed someone from California, and they said 250 times in a 45-minute episode. For me, I spent a lot of time working through editing, cleaning that up, because I want that person to shine. And the curse of being a Toastmaster is I hear all these filler words over and over again. And it's something that it's in my heart to help them to release some of those filler words. You don't want to release all of them, but some of them, so that they sound more professional. And as a Toastmaster, we all understand that. But it's hard as a podcaster to listen to those. That's painful as a podcaster. And I know you know this.
It's a perfect interjection. My painful experience, in my experience, has been editing myself.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm listening to myself talk and I'm like, oh, that, why did you say that? That was terrible. Why? Stop talking. Stop talking.
Sure.
But these are all things that you run into when you come into your own storytelling.
Here's something that I really do. And I want my guests to sound better than I do. So I actually edit less filler words for myself than I do for my guests, because I just feel like I want to honor them. That's the whole point behind the podcast.
And my experience in this last year that I've been doing this, I actually have not been editing out filler words from the video podcast, because in a video podcast,
it's too hard.
Yeah. And it's not a matter of it's too hard. It is just less natural. Yeah. So I'm aware of the filler words. I might edit or chop around them, but I don't remove them. At least I don't make any conscious effort to remove them. I mean, if it's an easy thing that's like a long pause filled with with another long pause, then I'll chop that off in the middle. Part of the storytelling can sometimes be the filler words.
Agreed.
Which is useful.
I think I do less removing of filler words because I want it to be more natural. Mm-hmm. And if you're listening, when you first start out, there's a little bit of that anxiety that you go through and you're like, you want it to sound perfect. I've gotten to a point where it doesn't have to sound perfect anymore. People love it for what it is. Mm-hmm. And that's what really matters. So I did get hung up and probably talk too much about filler words, but this is more for people that are listening. Maybe they're starting out as a podcaster and they're just wondering, how do I do it? What do I look for? And that, I think it's important to recognize them, but not to get too much anxiety around them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what the yaw counter is all about. Yep. Recognizing the conscious and unconscious use of filler words. At this point now, like you said, you've got 4 or 5 people basically calling, and you've got 4 in the backlog of editing.
Yeah.
How do you go about scheduling guests for your podcast at this point? Do you have an assistant or somebody that basically helps you schedule these things now, or is it still all yourself?
I am looking for an assistant, to be honest, somebody that's passionate. Maybe they're in Toastmasters, maybe they're hearing this, but this is an amazing experience for someone to connect to chefs around the world and to hear their stories and be part of something that's really special. I'm looking for that. I do work full time. This is self-funded, so it's tricky. I do it myself now, but yeah, I'm definitely looking for that. So I schedule out with them. Chefs are tricky though, because they don't always have a consistent schedule. Mm. You would think they would, but that creates some unique challenges, right? So I schedule them out, but I don't have an assistant. So,
do you have a publishing schedule for your podcasts?
So I do it once a month. I do it the second Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Now, I'll say that, but I have 70 episodes. So I interject some other episodes in between, but my standard is once a month.
I had on my notes page from our conversation in June to talk about Kyle Hall.
Oh, Kyle's incredible. He was number 3 in the World Championship of Public Speaking. And he's very active in District 32 and District 2, which are in my areas. I did mention Kyle because Kyle was key for the High Performance Leadership Project, which launched the Voice4Chefs podcast.
That's in the context. I remember
Absolutely.
That. He was the person at the beginning that was saying, get over that imposter syndrome.
Yep.
And just do it. And even if 3 people listen to it or 10 people listen to it, just do it.
Correct.
Get the process out, which, I remember that.
One of my favorite Toastmasters in the entire world.
I know I circled his name for a reason, and I knew there was a story there. Clubhouse.
Yeah.
How did you get involved? Like, how did your relationship get into Clubhouse, this online app that is audio only?
Yeah. So that was a very special thing. I had joined a long time ago, and I would say maybe 6 months in, I had launched the podcast. I wasn't really getting a large audience. I was some Toastmasters, some friends, some people I knew, those kind of things. Plus, also when you publish, it goes out to a lot of podcast directories and people just kind of filter in, listen. But for me, I took a course with Nancy Jutton, and Nancy is a brilliant person that helps people guest on podcasts. That's one of her big, well-known parts of who she is. She's an incredible business and marketing person, one of my heroes. And I took a course, a week-long course, and it was all about how to get yourself prepared for podcasting and for the media. And I was so inspired by that it helped me get over imposter syndrome. So I started going on Clubhouse, which is an audio-only app, and they invite you to speak, much like a podcast or an interview, except you could have 5 people at the same time speaking. You could have one person at the same time speaking, and you invite another person up on what we call the virtual stage. And it's audio only, so you don't see anybody, but you're listening. And there could be hundreds of people listening in what we call rooms, like a Zoom room. And there could be 100, there could be 200, there could be 500. And these could be people from all over the world. There's no specific place. So what happened was I met a chef online on Clubhouse. Her name is Chef Mimi Lan. And she was the catalyst for the growth of my podcast because she invited me to join this club called Food is Religion. And Food is Religion started, when I started, it was 5,000 people around the world that were in this club. And they would have daily rooms, they call them, for topics about food, about chefs, about anything related to food. It ran all day long because there are people all over the world, different time zones. So you join, you listen on your phone, you could be working, you could be traveling, whatever. You're not actively speaking. You're just listening as an audience member, much like people that'll be listening to the podcast. So what happened was we really connected, and I actually asked her to interview because she's a Michelin trained chef. And I was like, wow, Michelin trained chef, right? And I got excited about it. And so I interview with her on Clubhouse, but not officially on my podcast, right? And that was okay because she invited me into this amazing circle and she saw my energy, my passion, my desire to interview chefs. So she invited me to do an online audio only cooking class and interview chefs while they're cooking. You can't see anything. You're listening to the pan sizzle. You've got to really use your imagination. So that's how I started meeting chefs all over the world. And so what happened was I helped her because I became an officer in Clubhouse. I helped her grow the club from 5,000 people to 8,500 people in a year and a half. And there were other officers involved, but we would meet and we talked about strategies, had nothing to do with the podcast, but I fell in love with the idea and it meant so much to be part of this community and help grow it. And now I started to have listeners come from all over the world. So I went from 2 countries to 65 countries. And so I had all this reach, but the best part about it wasn't just interviewing chefs in Seattle anymore. I would interview chefs on Clubhouse, but then I would also interview chefs on my podcast. So I invited a celebrity chef who was a Chop champion from the Food Channel named Chef Ed Harris. I did a cooking class with him. Like I interviewed him in the cooking class. And then I said, hey, would you be open to an interview on my podcast? So he did. And that opened up more doors and the doors kept opening and opening. And that's when chefs started calling me and PR people started calling me or reaching out through email. I just got another one today. Would you like to interview someone from the Scoffier Institute, which is the first online cooking school ever in the US? And I was like, absolutely. So that's how things happen. And that's where it all came from was Clubhouse, Chef Mimi, Nancy Jutton, and really Kyle Hall. So that's kind of a little bit about Clubhouse. The other thing to know too is that any hobby, any passion, any career that you have, there's a conversation about it on Clubhouse all over the world. It's not just cooking, it's fly fishing, it's Toastmasters. Mark Brown's on Clubhouse on Toastmasters. I would listen to him and you can come up on stage and talk to him. That's so cool. Their algorithms have changed a little bit. So it's a little bit different to navigate, but it was an amazing platform to be involved in. I stepped away a little bit because I'm so busy now with all the chefs in my podcast. For me, because I was a Toastmaster, it was easy. I didn't struggle with a lot of things. I already knew how to present. I already knew how to have a conversation. What I ended up doing was supporting other people doing that were going through that struggle. And loving that journey, absolutely loving that journey, because as an officer, I was a coach. And I'd be coaching chefs on how to speak up in Clubhouse. And that just took off. And then we went from the cooking class to a food talk show. So I started doing that. And then I started interviewing chefs on Clubhouse just as a regular interview, right? And I brought lots from different circles. And Chef Mimi would introduce me to famous people because she was really connected. So I started interviewing them. And it just grew and grew. And now you have a great resume when you approach a PR person and say, I'd like to interview your chef. Well, I've interviewed this food channel chef, this food channel chef. I interviewed James Trees, he helped start Kitchen Nightmares and he helped start Hell's Kitchen. And that was an amazing interview recently from Las Vegas. And he's absolutely incredible. And he tells it like it is. There's nothing held back. It's the real story. And that was epic. But that all came about because of Toastmasters, because of Clubhouse. I mean, those are big factors in the success of the podcast.
That is the Toastmasters ingredient that I'll probably point to as one of the things that changes the most, for at least for me, maybe for you, maybe for many other people, is my approach to evaluation is always additive.
Right.
You're always adding ingredients to what it is that you've heard. It's never about taking away because the ingredients are already there. So you're always adding to what it is that you heard. How do you make something just a little bit better, slightly better texture, whatever it is? That speech, then evaluation kind of process is important and critical evolution of everything on that. And your story makes me think also there's no such thing as an overnight success. You've always got lots of people, got lots of people behind. There's another podcast, ones who are hearing all of the, I couldn't have done this, but for all of this extra support.
Oh, without a doubt.
These things that inspire me in the background, these stories, the mentors and the coaches and everybody in the background that is helping to add to the experience that this chef is credited for providing.
Yeah.
But only for the grace of the support around them are they able to do it.
And I've been really lucky. I don't have any bullheaded chefs on my podcast. There were one or two, and I actually refused them. They were famous. And I was like, nope, I don't see a fit. And that was hard, right? In the beginning, but I was like, I just don't see a fit. I interview chefs that give back. I interview chefs where cooking is in their soul and they're not here to sell something. I mean, they may have a product and we talk about it, but that isn't their ultimate goal. They're here to share the stories with our listeners. They're here to open up and give advice and connect. And the greatest gift that I can offer, and this is from my soul, is to connect them to somebody else that inspires them. And those are the people that come on my show. And I feel so blessed and so lucky. But it would have never happened without Kyle Hall, without my wife, without Linda Worthman, who was on my high performance project, and without Nan Hamilton, who was on my high performance project. All of those people came together and we built this. I mean, we built this idea, right? And it was so special. And if you're thinking about a podcast, I'm just going to put it out there. Definitely, without question, create a high performance leadership project, because you have two projects you can work on. One is the high performance leadership project, and the other is the podcast. There's two levels, level 4 and level 5, that you can do. And it's so powerful and it can be life-changing. And as a Toastmaster, anyone in Toastmasters can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this podcast is my DTM project.
I love it.
And I'm working on my third path right now, visionary communication. And I'm going to be relaunching a podcast on that visionary communication channel path to carry through and to explore that even more. I had a thought that was occurring to me moments ago, but then it evaporated, as anything that sits on the stove for too long will. I have a guest question that is provided specifically for you.
Oh, now you've got me curious. I mean, curiosity is in the air.
When you have a really quiet moment, what truly makes you happy?
Wow. A quiet moment. I think reflecting back on living in the Northwest. I live in Seattle, Washington, and it's one of those things where we have mountains, we have rivers, we have Puget Sound, which is a large body of salt water. And a lot of times I'll listen to relaxing music and I'll just think about those things, the hikes that I take with my wife and our rescue dog, Pongo. And those are amazing memories that I reflect back on.
That question was from Beth Ramsey, our past Region 1 director. So that's an interesting question. And I say that while I'm looking out the window to the north where I have Mount Seymour and the Baden Powell Trail in North Vancouver. I'll take you on a hike there with your puppy if you ever come up and visit in Vancouver, Canada.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Are you interested? Would you like to flip the script? Do you have some questions for me?
Yeah, I definitely do. Because, what people need to understand, podcasting is a little bit of work. You've got to be driven to do it. Like, it's got to be a passion. You can certainly do it as a project, but what happens to most people is they get hooked. They really get hooked on it. They fall in love with the idea, and it takes Toastmasters to the next level. What has your journey been like in podcasting? If you can just kind of summarize, like, from the beginning, did you have imposter syndrome? And how did you get over that? And what was the journey like?
That is an interesting question. The journey for me into podcasting, I can go back in time quite a distance. Journey for me in podcasting was the first time I started hearing long form interviews on the radio. And then podcasting apps. This goes back to 2008 when I was doing triathlons. And in triathlons, you're not allowed to listen to headphones with music in them because you got to be able to pay attention to stuff. So in my training runs, instead of listening to music, I used to listen to these long form interviews. And then I started seeking them out and finding and learning. And it was just an opportunity for me to listen to these conversations that were not 7-minute scripted Q&A sessions on a late night talk show. So that drew my interest to it. But now, filler word, now looking at my journey into podcasting over the last year, the imposter syndrome, I don't even know that I would point to it as imposter syndrome. It's a fear of feeling like I'm too much. Just being able to draw these questions out of the people that I'm talking to. And it's been really enlightening to look into it from a video perspective to make sure that I'm putting the focus where the focus needs to be to add to the story or let the story grow. If that makes any sense.
It does. And is there a moment where you were just like reflecting on something or somebody really affected you by doing this? Like you just felt, wow, this is why I did this.
Yes. There is a moment. Okay. Earlier this year, there was an episode I was editing and it was a really long episode. It was an hour and 20 minutes of recording with 4 people. So 2 hosts and 2 guests. And I'm editing it. And this actually comes back to a question that I had written down for you too, is at some point I realized that this conversation was originally intended to be 2 conversations. So I'll split them up into 2, first and second. And I really struggled with it for a while on the edit until I came down to realizing, oh no, this is actually 3 episodes. It has to be broken out into 3 separate episodes on the back end after the conversation, just because the flow of the conversation worked that way.
Interesting.
So then in the back end of it, I ended up turning this one into 3 episodes, and all 3 of them are very distinct and interesting in their own way. And an episode that immediately followed it was a lady named Sherry Race, and she redefined the word fail for me as first attempt in learning. And I'll tell you, when she said it that way, and I hadn't heard it until we were in the conversation, but as soon as she finished saying that, in my mind, there was this long boom, just a hit where my brain suddenly went, oh yeah, I get that. That is a really good acronym. FAIL. F.A.I.L. This big acronym. FAIL. So just experiment. Throw stuff at the wall. Throw your pasta at the wall and see if it sticks.
I love it. I love
see
it.
how well it's cooked into an analogy for that.
I think about this a lot. I think about over 3 years ago when I started as a podcaster. And yes, I had an imposter syndrome. I did a lot of things to get over that. And those are amazing exercises that really increased my confidence. But what can you share with Toastmasters that are listening about starting a podcast? What advice would you give them when you remember when you started? Are there any lessons learned? Is there any advice that you can give them to help them move forward? Because maybe some of them are sitting on the fence like I was, where it took me months to launch the first episodes. What can you tell them that will help them launch?
I don't know that my advice would be really good.
Okay.
My suggestion would be to just do it.
Yeah.
And be uncomfortable with doing it and know it's going to be uncomfortable doing it. And I don't know that I'm quite there yet. I'm still pushing myself through that imposter syndrome too, being aggressive at it. But that's part of just my own neurology. I'm always uncomfortable doing what it is that I'm doing. And maybe that's the advice that I would give is know that it is uncomfortable, and that the line that I keep saying is growth only happens with the appropriate application of stress.
Oh, very interesting. That's great. And then a final question. Who helped you along in your podcasting journey? Is there any shout outs that you want to give to someone or a few people that really helped you in this process?
Yes, several people, actually. One primary, like first one that comes off the top of my head is the District 7 incoming club growth director, Fred Bergeron.
Absolutely.
And when I came to him last year in May at part of the Podmasters Club, I came to him with this idea because I had this podcast idea percolating in my head when I came to this club. And I said, I just want to talk to Toastmasters about their Toastmasters journey and what it is that makes them interested and challenged and growing into Toastmasters. And Fred was in on it, a really great idea on it, and lined up a really great lineup of guests and people to talk to, which was great. And then there was an expectation, a publishing schedule that came along with it, which I wouldn't have picked up at the outset, but I tried to fit into it initially. And I realized very quickly that was just going to be too much. So I had to dial it back. I couldn't do weekly, and even twice a month became a little bit excessive for me in terms of access to my computer and editing software and stuff like that. But I tried and got lots of feedback, and excellent feedback from him to get us to the point where we now have, well, this will be 15 episodes for my year.
Awesome.
The second person that was incredibly helpful and was another lady named DJ. Yeah, DJ. Silver Fox Talks. She has a live stream podcast that she runs out of Florida. Awesome. She helps out with lots of brainstorming ideas initially at the front, just Q&A back and forth. She helps introduce me to Canva to create the very first template. And then Bob Hall, who is also with District 7, he helps especially in the fall when we did a couple of interviews together, and especially that one long interview that ended up becoming 3 episodes. We just had really great bouncing ideas off of each other, ridiculous ideas we'd bounce off of each other. And the whole point of that is you come up with 3 terrible ideas and 1 really good idea.
Okay.
And then we would come up with this structure and this idea. Those 3 people specifically were super helpful to make this happen. And now Yeah. And it's interesting. And then other stuff that I've discovered along the way, Zoom came out with its own booking app to be able to align the schedule with
that's
my
right.
Zoom app. Super, super helpful. And then I have my voiceover website, which is not a person, but is a place where I could host some of these links that I could send out and say, okay, you're to make these schedule things happen. Like those 2 items at the end for the last couple of months have been super excellent resources for me to play around with too, along with all of the support in the back end.
Oh, that's fantastic. I want to give a shout out to Fred too, because I joined Podmasters and it's this amazing community of supported people, just like in Toastmasters, but it's really focused on learning about podcasting and giving yourself an opportunity to practice a podcast. We can do 20-minute interviews where people can really practice and get incredible round robin feedback. And Fred created that concept and it's really powerful. And then also he introduced me to you to make this happen. And I personally, I want to give a couple shout outs. Stage Time University is an incredible way to advance your Toastmaster skills. And I did that for 2 years. And what's amazing is every Wednesday night, we would meet with Mark Brown, world champion public speaking. Darren LaCroix would be there. Jennifer Leon is an international speech coach, and a couple others, and people from all over the world that were in Toastmasters, and also people that were professional speakers. And they would give a presentation and they would be coached by world champions live on Zoom every Wednesday night. And I did that for 2 years. And it helped me to really hone in on the podcast and things that I wanted to say and share. And then Craig Valentine, who the one thing I remember from him, and I quote him, is it's not about perfection. It's about connection. And the greatest joy for me in Voice4Chefs is to be able to connect chefs, one chef from Australia to another chef in Colorado or Florida or something like that. I have an international pastry judge who just opened 2 restaurants in Batam, Indonesia. And he's an ambassador for Nestle chocolate. And he became a great friend. Like, he is so passionate about cooking and teaching. He even teaches kids how to cook and pastry. And he's pretty famous in Indonesia. And for me, the podcast is one thing, but the connection is the other part of it. This connection right now is really powerful because in some way, I think we're going to help each other. And I'm super excited about that. And that's what it's all about in podcasting. And it just perfectly aligns with Toastmasters.
I couldn't agree with you more. What a great way to finish off a question like that. I love the additive nature of the Toastmasters experience. They're always just pick up what is good and make it slightly better.
Yep.
Make it slightly better, or even just give it slightly different context.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that I just encourage people that are listening right now, if you're on the fence, just jump in and do it. And know that people in Toastmasters are going to support you. And lots of people that you're going to meet are going to be really excited about what you're doing, whatever your message is to share.
Michael, thank you for joining me for this great conversation. And I really appreciate all of the ideas that we had. And thank you for being my last guest in the District 7 podcast.
I'm really honored. And the last thing I say is, if you're interested in podcasting, District 7 has Podmasters. Check it out. It's an amazing club. Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on Facebook. Find our website in the show notes. Subscribe on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen. Leave a comment with 5 stars and stay tuned for the next episode of Voice4Chefs.